Hello and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering EDH deck tech. Today we are taking a look again at one of my actual decks that I actually own. And a few months ago I always had the feeling of wanting to build a monocolored deck. So I was really interested in for quite a while to build Gwenna, Eyes of Gaea, a 3 mana 2/3, and you can tap her to add 2 mana of any combination of colors, and you can spend this mana only to cast creature spells or activate abilities of a creature, card, or a creature. Whenever you cast a creature spell with power 5 or greater, put a 1/1 counter on Gwenna and untap her. When I started playing this deck, a lot of people have been asking me, why aren't you building Selvala? Because she's way more consistent, she has more card draw. Well, not more consistent, but she has inbuilt card draw and can make a lot more mana in one turn. Gwenna is way more conditional because you need several untap triggers for her, but what I pretty quickly found out when playing her is that she can grow really, really big, especially in this deck, and also provide a lot of value with being also a big beater. And so this deck turned out to be a mono-green stompy deck that wants to actually storm off. We use a lot of Discover, we play a lot of Cascade, or we try to play a lot of that simply to get as much free value to be as fast as possible in this deck to overrun our opponents, because that's something that I realize really often, either when I see playing Stompy decks or Voltron decks, they simply don't take a player out. They often do this, yeah, I will hit you for 10, I will hit you for 10, I will hit you for 10, and they end up losing the game because people with mid-range decks or other type of decks catch up, play a board wipe or something like that, and then they have nothing left. So this is also something that I can really incentivize players to do. If you play a Voltron deck or a Stompy deck, feel free to take players out. This is how you win games. And especially in this deck, I try to achieve that with getting a lot of free spells, free value, and overrun my opponents with. And now I would say let's jump right into the deck. I have just featured Gwenna. I will place her here because we will come back to her. When playing a monocolored deck, I do think that the medallions make a lot of sense. Emerald Medallion, 2 mana for an artifact, green spells you cast, cost 1 less to cast. We will start this video off with the Rams section in this deck, and we will go through this now. Explore, 2 mana sorcery, you may play an additional land this turn, draw a card. I am a big fan when playing a green deck that you go for spells that will actually give you additional lands, or that will put you additional lands into play. I'm not a big fan of playing mana rocks in a deck that features that has access to green. I think when you have access to green, you want to ramp with playing additional lands or getting additional lands on the battlefield, and not with sitting there and playing mana rocks. This is my opinion. Exploration, 1 mana enchantment, you may play an additional land on each of your turns. It is not the best card for me lately because I often keep hands with like 3 lands or even 2 lands, and I also have an exploration, and there have been games where I was stuck with 2 lands in play and simply didn't draw any more lands. So when playing exploration, I should definitely go for way more ways of drawing additional cards. Search for Tomorrow, I really like this card. 3 mana sorcery, search a library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle your library. This also says that it comes into play untapped, which is great, and you can suspend it for 1 green mana with 2 time counters on it, and in 2 turns in your upkeep you can cast this spell for free. I think it's great. It does a lot of work, and what I have also realized is that you need, or at least at the power level where I'm playing with my friends, is that when you're ramping or when you want to ramp, you need to do that in turn 1, turn 2, maybe still turn 3, but then something else needs to happen. You need either then you need your card advantage, or you need to make a bigger play than just ramping. So this also comes in handy. Yeah, of course we play Soaring. Utopia, Sprawl, Enchant Forest, choose a color, and that land taps for an additional mana of that 1 color. And yeah, this is not an additional land drop as I have described earlier, but it comes on turn 1. And this is what I was just saying. I think the power level that we are playing at is simply way more faster, and something needs to happen on turn 1 and turn 2. You won't see any Llanowar elves or stuff like that because this deck also has a certain theme. All the creatures in here have at least power 5, and you will see why later, or I will explain why later. When featuring Utopia Sprawl, we also play Wild Growth. You can enchant a land, and that land taps for an additional green mana. My favorite green ramp spell is Traverse the Outlands. Search a library for up to X basic land cards, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control, and put those cards onto the battlefield tapped. Then shuffle a library. This is a mono-green Stompy deck, so we of course play Galta. So it has happened to me that I was able to play, or to put 12 forests into play. And yeah, I don't have to explain that. 12 forests, what else do you want? We also play Skyshroud Claim. as with all of the turn 1 ramps that are possible in this deck, it happened to me in several scenarios that I was able to pull off a Sky Shroud Claim in turn 2, maybe also still turn 3, but turn 3 it's still good, simply because you search a library for 2 forest cards, or for up to 2 forest cards, and you put them onto the battlefield, so they come into play untapped, which is huge. I do think that I have missed my Nature's Law. I was really, okay, somewhere along the way we will find a Nature's Law that still should belong to the ramp section. Then we continue with Carddraw. Sylvan Library, 2 mana enchantment. At the beginning of your draw step, you may draw 2 additional cards. If you do, choose 2 cards in your hand, drawn this turn. For each of those cards, pay for life, or put the card on top of your library. This is a nice looking at the top of your deck effect, and you can draw additional cards from this card. And life is a resource, so we gotta spend it. Shamanic Revelation is a 5 mana sorcery. Draw a card for each creature you control, and with Ferocious, you gain 4 life for each creature you control with power 4 or greater. This card has easily drawn me, I think, like 6 cards in turns and has gained me like 24 life, which is great. And yeah, it's still a really, really good card draw spell in mono green. We more likely go for big draw spells than for smaller draw plays. Of course, we just featured Sylvan Library, but you will see in a minute. Garruk's Uprising, a 3 mana enchantment. When it enters, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. Creatures you control have trample, and whenever a creature you control with power 4 or greater enters, draw a card. This is, yeah, simply a powerful anthem effect that you want to have on the battlefield, because not all creatures in this deck have trample. So yeah, great. Up the Beanstalk, completely busted, and I have played it a few days ago, and I think I stormed off so brutally that I finished the game in turn 5, and Up the Beanstalk definitely helped. 2 mana enchantment. When it enters, and whenever you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, draw a card. And it was devastating. It replaces itself, and after that, yeah, it goes really, really big. Rishka's Expertise, still a really good card in 2024. 6 mana sorcery. Draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. You may cast a spell with mana value 5 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. As I have said earlier, with Traverse the Outlands, we do play Galta in this deck, so it happens quite easily that you draw like 12 cards, and after that you still get a free spell, and those free spells can be really devastating too. Elemental Bond, 3 mana enchantment. Whenever a creature with power 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card, simply as Garruk's Uprising. Well, a little bit worse, but it still does a lot of work in this deck, but it's not the best card draw engine here in this deck. And then we also play Return of the Wildspeaker, a 5 mana instant. Choose 1, draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control, which is the mode that you will most likely always be choosing. Or you could also, non-human creatures you control get +3/+3 until end of turn. Tribute to the World Tree, I do play this card because I do have a really, really small devotion theme in this deck, and for 3 green pips it's great. It shares a mana spot with Gwenna, which makes it not that easy to curve it out nicely. But whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card if its power is 3 or greater, otherwise put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Yeah, this section here is some sort of a protection section, and I did put Smuggler's Surprise into it because I didn't really know where else to put it, because it's a very versatile spell. For 1 green, an instant that has 3 +2, mill 4 cards. You may put up to 2 creature and or land cards from among the milled cards into your hand, which I do quite often, I gotta say that. And for 5 additional mana, you may put up to 2 creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield, which also did a lot of work for me when surprising my opponents. With the board state wasn't that clear and I didn't want to commit too much to the board, I simply kept this one up, and when I found a good window, I pulled this one off. And yeah, I had way more power on the battlefield, or I was able to surprise my opponents. In the last mode, +1, creatures you control with power 4 or greater gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn, which in this deck features probably all of my creatures except for Gwenna if she isn't big enough. And yeah, it's basically like a heroic intervention for my creatures. Tyver Stand, 1 green and X instant. Target creature you control gets +X/+X until end of turn and gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn, which is, you cast this 1 for 1 green. I have never cast it to pump my creature even more up, because you want it for the hexproof and the indestructible. Tamio's Safekeeping, the straight up better version than Tyver Stand in my opinion, because Tamio's Safekeeping says target permanent and not creature, and it gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn and you gain 2 life. This has also protected quite a few of my key pieces in this deck, which I will feature later, but Tamio's Safekeeping is an absolute banger and should be played probably in every color that plays green. Snakeskin Veil, 1 mana instant, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control, it gains hexproof. Sadly not indestructible, but you can't have everything. Lightning Greaves, 2 mana artifact equipment. Equip creature as haste and shroud, equip for 0. I probably cut Swiftfoot Boots out of all of my decks with the latest Nowhere to Run, which simply shuts down ward and hexproof. And yeah, Lightning Greaves is still a really good card. I found out for myself personally that Swiftfoot Boots are simply too slow in the type of decks that I play, In a Voltron deck, it's still really, really good because you need to be able to target your creature, but Lightning Greaves, yeah, my preferable choice in my kind of decks. Royal Treatment, 1 mana instant, target creature you control gains hexproof, and you also create a royal token attached to that creature, so it gets +1/+1 and has ward 1. Also really nice. Heroic Intervention, of course we gotta play it, a 2 mana instant, permanents you control gain indestructible and hexproof until end of turn. To be a bit more flexible, we also play Collective Resistance, also a card that probably should be played in every deck that plays green. A 2 mana instant with Escalate, so you can choose more modes, and for every chosen mode for every mode chosen before the first one, you've got to pay an additional green. You can destroy an artifact, you can destroy an enchantment, or target creature gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Really, really good. When we come from protection to interaction, we are in mono green, we are very limited in what we can do, so we play Beast Within, a 3 mana instant, destroy target permanent, its controller puts a 3/3 green beast creature token onto the battlefield. Yep, as I've said, we are very limited in what we can do, so we gotta play it. We play Cosmic Hunger, a 2 mana instant, target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to another target creature, planeswalker, or battle. I do prefer these effects more over fight effects, simply because I want to be able to answer Death Touch creatures without losing my creatures, which is why these deals damage equal to spells I prefer a little bit more, and Cosmic Hunger can also take care of planeswalkers. Here's Nature's Law. Yeah, that one should have belonged into the Ram section of the deck. Search a library for a forest card, put that card onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. I had that one laying around and I would have played it anyways. I should probably also get a free Visits for this deck. Don't have it yet. One of the cards why I wanted to build this deck is Contest of Claws. I have seen this card being played from a friend of mine, and I thought this card is really good. I want to play it, and I need to build a deck around it. Well, not around it, but I want to feature this card in one of my new decks. It's a 2 mana sorcery. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to another target creature, and if excess damage was dealt this way, discover X, where X is that X has damage. And in many cases, or especially in the early game, I have absolutely no problem with firing this one off, because remember, with Discover you can also put that card into your hand. And yeah, depending on the excess damage, we can get another interaction spell, we can hit a free ram spell, a protection spell, and in the late game it can also hit really, really big stuff, which I will feature later. But Contest of Claws, even though it's a sorcery, I do really, really like this card, and it's free real estate. I mean, you get a free Discover if you manage to pull this one off. I love it. Bite Down, 2 mana instant. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker you don't control. Again, it covers creatures and planeswalkers, so great card. When playing a mono green Stompy deck, you have to play, or you should definitely play, Ram Through, a 2 mana instant. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. And if the creature you control has trample, excess damage dealt this way is to that creature's controller instead. This card has won me games against control decks that simply locked me down from attacking them because my creatures were so huge. I just shot this one at one of their smaller creatures and excess damage killed them. It is Nature's Claim. A few cards in this deck are in German, sorry for that, but yeah, I had them laying around. So Nature's Claim, 1 mana instant, destroy target artifact or enchantment, and its owner gains 4 life. Yeah, a little bit of artifact and enchantment removal. Regrowth, a 2 mana sorcery, return target card from your graveyard to your hand. I could have also played the Witnesses, but they are below 5 power, so we are not playing them. And yep. When it comes to playing a mono green Stompy deck, you will, of course, you want to overrun your opponents, but at some point you should definitely check your hand and the board state and how much cards your opponents still have in hand. And then somebody says, okay, I should approach it a little bit more slower because I'm pretty sure that my opponents do have interaction. And Momentous Fall is a card. It put me ahead in the game so often. Momentous Fall, a 4 mana instant, is an additional cost to cast Momentous Fall, sacrifice a creature, which will in many cases be a creature card that is being targeted if you don't have any protection. And you draw cards equal to the sacrifice creature's power, and then you gain life equal to its toughness, which is just huge. I've drawn so many cards so often with this card, and my opponents wasted a removal spell. I mean, they still got rid of the creature, but I got 10 cards back, so it was totally fine for me. Which is also why we play Greater Good, a 4 mana enchantment, sacrifice a creature, draw cards equal to the sacrifice creature's power, and then discard 3 cards. I'm a big fan of playing sacrifice outlets, because, yeah, you can do it at instant speed. Your opponents need, or should, interact with this card first before they try to interact with anything else on your board. And yeah, as I've said, we draw so many cards, we have such big creatures, this is so much card advantage, it's crazy. And in quite a few matchups that I play with my play groups, I face a lot of living deaths, and as soon as this card hits the battlefield, they always consider twice if they want to fire off a living death. So, great card. With Contest of Claws, I was also really interested in building this deck because of Monstrous Vortex, and this card is an absolute banger in this deck. It's a 4-mana enchantment. Whenever you cast a creature spell with power 5 or greater, we are hitting the theme here, discover X, where X is that spell's mana value. And this card has gone through my deck so many times. It's crazy. It's crazy how consistent it is in this deck. As soon as I hit a creature with one of my discovers, and remember that discover is also a cast for free, it will re-trigger Monstrous Vortex and also Gwenna, so I can make quite a bit of creature mana with her, and she will always get that 1/1 counter. Monstrous Vortex has developed into a card that as soon as my playgroups see this card, they will throw every removal they have at this card, and this is why, also another reason why Tamiyo's safekeeping is great. This card has won me so many games, it's crazy. I've said earlier that we want to get a lot of free spells, which is why we play Apex Devastator, a 10 mana 10/10 with 4 instances of Cascade, and this is also the reason why Apex Devastator is such a powerful card. These are 4 instances of Cascade, which nowadays you do have way more ways of answering triggered abilities, but 4 instances is quite a lot, and this chain here was crazy in so many games. I had a Monstrous Vortex on the field, I did cast an Apex Devastator, I had 4 Cascades, I had 1 Discover for 10, and then it kept going. It just kept going. I've been going through my whole deck, I went for my final overrun. Really, really great time. When playing a monocolor deck, I can always encourage to look back at the Defilers. Defiler of Vigor, a 5-mana 6/6 with Trample, which is already a great stat line. And as an additional cost to cast green permanent spells, you may pay 2 life, and those spells cost 1 green less to cast if you paid life this way, and this effect reduces only the amount of green mana you pay. Furthermore, whenever you cast a green permanent spell, put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. By the way, we are now in the creature section, and this card, yeah, it's completely... I do really like this card, let's say it like this, because it is such a powerful creature already by itself. 5 mana 6/6 Trample is really solid. It discounts all of your green permanent spells, where we do play a lot, and it also anthems up all of our creatures, or it buffs them all up with additional +1/+1 counters. It's crazy. Orgia Custom, Deepest Growth, a 5 mana 6/5 with Trample, a little bit worse than Defiler because of 1 lacking toughness, but whenever Orgia Custom deals combat damage to a player, reveal that many cards from the top of your library, and you may put a creature and or land card from among them onto the battlefield, and yeah, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. When it dies, it comes back as a land, which you can easily transform back. It's crazy how easy you can do that, because for 3 mana and tapping it, you can transform him back, but activate only if you control 10 or more permanents, which is what this deck tries to do. And yeah, pretty often, turn 2, I brought out Gwenna. Turn 3, I was able to bring out Orgia Custom with Gwenna. And yeah, turn 4, I was able to connect for 6 and found some big bombs and additional land drop. It's just really, really good, because the land also comes into play untapped. Yeah, it does. And really powerful card. Mono green, we gotta get haste going because we want to win in 1 turn. So we play Zurich and Gorklaw, a 6 mana 6/5 with Trample, and other creatures you control have Trample, which is already great. But even more powerful, whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a 1/1 counter on it, and it gains haste until end of turn, which is just so much value on this one card. Of course, you don't draw cards or stuff like that, but imagine having Zurg and Gorklaw on the battlefield and you hit an Orgia Custom. It's a 7/6. It connects. You find even more stuff that comes onto the battlefield. Zurg and Gorklaw, mono green decks play this card. It's just too good. It became a meme in my friend group, but it's also a really, really powerful card with Mir Superion. A 2 mana 5/6 artifact creature, and you can only spend only mana produced by creatures to cast Mir Superion, which means this is a free spell with Gwenna. Well, not a free spell in the way how we know them, but you make 2 mana with Gwenna, cast Mir Superion, because it has 5 or more power, you will untap Gwenna and she will get a +1/+1 counter. It's just free real estate, you gotta play this card, and especially with cards like Monstrous Vortex on the battlefield, you can hit into your Soaring, a Wild Growth, Utopia Sprawl, or into one of your protection spells. And due to Discover being absolutely busted, you can also put those cards into your hand if you don't want to cast them immediately. So Mir Superion, absolute chat in this deck. And yeah, we continue Old Narbonne, 7 mana 7/7 with Flying, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, create that many treasure tokens. I don't know how often I have said it, but I'm really not a fan of treasure synergies, but we are a monocolor deck, so in my opinion, we are completely fine with doing everything to win games, because we do play a monocolor deck and we are limited to what we can do. And this card, yeah, so much mana advantage. If this one connects, already 7 treasures are enough to win in the next turn. Well, not win, but generate so much value that it will be really, really hard for your opponents to catch up. Yeah, this card, Thundering Baloth, a 6 mana 5/5 with Trample and also Lieutenant. As long as you control your commander, itself gets +2/+2, and other creatures you control also get +2/+2 and have Trample, which is really, really strong, because I also had turns where I was like, tap Gwenna, cast Thundering Baloth, untap Gwenna, she gets a +1/+1 counter, it hits the battlefield, and Gwenna is already a 5/6 with trample. And yeah, commander damage also does a lot in this deck, because of all the discover and cascade chains, we were able to pump Gwenna up really, really big. Pretty often people think like, she's just a mana dog, but pretty quickly she slaps for like 17 and people are like, what the hell is going on? As I've said earlier, we play mono green, we gotta find haste, so we also play Zorak the Huntcaller, a 4 mana 5/4 with Formidable. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if creatures you control have total power 8 or greater, target creature you control gains haste until end of turn. This is sadly just limited to one creature, but if we have powerful connect triggers with Old Narbonne or also with Ojak Kaslam, for example, it's definitely worth playing around it. And in addition to that, tap Gwenna, cast Zorak, untap Gwenna, she gets a 1/1 counter, and you are already at 8 total power to enable Formidable. And there are enough triggers or connect triggers that we want to have. Yeah, coming back to the roots, we play Regal Force, a 7 mana 5/5, and when it enters, you draw a card for each green creature you control. I have to be completely honest, back in the days I was like, this is not that good of a card, because 7 mana for a 5/5 with no other abilities than just drawing cards, people can respond to casting it and remove your stuff, and you probably won't be drawing cards. But in this deck, this card also goes, it's just great. You draw so many cards with this card. People are not really looking forward to answering this one, because they are also like, there are so many other threats on the board, I gotta do something about that. We do play Vorinclex, an 8 mana 7/6 with Trample, and whenever I tap a land for mana, I get an additional mana of that mana that land produced, and whenever my opponents tap a land for mana, these lands become locked and don't untap during their next untap step. And as I have said earlier, just as with Old Narbonne, we are totally fine with doing everything to win games, and locking down my opponents is, part of it. I do really like these Phyrexian artworks, and I do really like playing this card. Vaultborn Tyrant, our board wipe insurance. It's a 7 mana 6/6 with Trample, and when it or another creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 3 life and draw a card, which is basically a great henge in this deck. Just not that good because it doesn't make mana, but it's a creature and it's a powerful creature, so way better in my opinion. And when it dies, if it's not a token, create a token that's a copy of it, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. So this is what I was saying with board wipe insurance, because if our opponents wipe the board, we still get our Vaultborn Tyrant and can easily recover because we still have a Carddraw engine on the battlefield. So Vaultborn Tyrant, great card in this deck. Wayward Sawtooth, a 3 mana 5/5 with Ascent. You may play an additional land on each of your turns, and it can't block or attack unless you have the City's Blessing. And it's a 5/5, so we are totally fine to play it in this deck. And in addition to that, we brought out Gwenna next turn. We tap her, play Wayward Sawtooth for basically just 1 mana, because Gwenna already made us mana. We get an additional land drop, and it's also a great card because of mana value 3. So with our Cascade Chains or Discover Chains, we can also do really, really good stuff with Wayward Sawtooth. Really like this card. Vorinclex, another 5 mana 6/6 with Trample and Reach, and when it enters, search a library for up to 2 forest cards, reveal them, put them into your hand, which is a great refill. I sometimes had hands where I kept like 2 or 3 lands, brought out Gwenna at some point, and I still had Vorinclex in hand, and I simply didn't draw into additional land drops, but I curved out so nicely that on turn 2 or turn 3, I was able to cast Vorinclex, it resolved, and I was able to refill my hands for the next 2 turns with land drops. So great card. And it also has a backside for 8 mana. You can, first chapter, mill 10 cards, which I don't really like. I don't activate this ability often. I can use Gwenna's mana to activate this ability, but I don't do this often. Mill 10 cards, put up to 2 creature cards from among the milled cards onto the battlefield. Chapter 2, distribute 7 +1/+1 counters among any number of target creatures you control. And third chapter is, until end of turn, creatures you control gain for 1 generic. This creature fights another target you don't control, and he comes back as his front side. Didn't do this much until yet, but looking forward to do it a little bit more often. But this is not how I want to spend my mana. I just want to chain through my deck, and Hiking Raptor, a 4 mana 5/3 with Ward 2, and at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, you add 2 green mana. Really powerful card in this deck. It synergizes with Gwenna. It's also great for Monstrous Vortex. Really, really good card. When it comes to damage insurance, we play Vigor, also because of 3 green pips. And a 6 mana 6/6 with Trample, and if damage would be dealt to another creature you control, remember it's another, so your opponents always have to take care of Vigor first. Prevent that damage, and put a 1/1 counter on that creature for each 1 damage prevented this way. When Vigor is put into a graveyard from anywhere, shuffle it into its Honors Library. Overruns, or even more anthems. Zopandrel, Hunger Dominus, a 7 mana 4/6 with Reach. At the beginning of each combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control until end of turn, which is great, which is a really, really powerful overrun effect. But as I've said earlier, in a few of my play groups, we play Living Deaths, or my friends play Living Death. I also play Living Death in my K&K deck. And this is why its activated ability is so powerful, because if I have a really, really good board state and didn't find a way to finish the game, and my opponents are interested in pulling off a Living Death, I'm still able for 2 green Phyrexian and sacrificing 2 other creatures, put an indestructible counter on Zopandrel, Hunger Dominus. I need to sacrifice other creatures, so we would definitely lose a Zopandrel in the Living Death, but we can fill up our graveyard with all of our big bombs that are currently on the battlefield and get them back if the Living Death resolves. But you also gotta manage how many creatures you want to sacrifice into it, because people see this line and wait with their counter spells, pass priority to me, I start this chain, and at some point, I do also say, okay, now Living Death resolves, and they are always like, why didn't he sacrifice more? We didn't see it, and we passed prior over him, and then it still happens, and I still get half my board back, but still more, it's better than losing all of my board, and then they counter the Living Death, and then I'm sitting there and just sacrifice all my creatures into Zopandrel. Galta, Primal Hunger, a 12 mana 12/12, and this spell costs X less to cast, where X is the total power of creatures you control. Also in this deck, from the creatures that you have seen, and with Gwenna growing bigger and bigger the more creature spells we cast, this card, pretty quickly becomes a 2 mana 12/12 with Trample, so great card. One of my latest additions is Silverback Elder, a 5 mana 5/7, and whenever we cast a creature spell, we choose one. Either we destroy target artifact or enchantment, or we look at the top 5 cards of our library. We may put a land card, any land, from among them onto the battlefield tapped, so re-ramp us a little bit, or we can gain for life. This is crazy because it says when you cast a creature spell. This deck is, it's built to chain, it's built to storm in mono green, and with Gwenna also always seeing those cast triggers of those creatures, we can float so much creature mana. Silverback Elder sees stuff, we can ping down artifacts and enchantments, or we can also look at the top 5 and just ram through our deck. It's such a good card. As soon as a card says, whenever you cast, it's basically free real estate. It's so good, so Silverback Elder does a lot of work in this deck. We play Evercoat Ursine, a 5 mana 6/5 with Trample, and it has Hideaway free twice, so we always look at the top 3 cards of our library, exile one of them under Evercoat Ursine, and whenever Evercoat Ursine deals combat damage to a player, if there are cards exiled with it, you may play one of them without paying its mana cost, and this is a play, is also a cast, and it's a free cast, which will re-trigger Gwenna. This will sadly happen in our main phase, so we will lose the mana, but we also untap Gwenna for the clapback that our opponents are planning, and if we get a free cast in our combat, we will have her untapped for our next, for the second main phase, and it's still free value. It's a 5 mana 6/5 with Trample. What else do you want? From back in the days, I have played this card in probably my second ever built commander deck. I do still have it laying around here. A Downgrade Regent, a 7 mana 8/8, and when it enters the battlefield, we become the Monarch, and as long as we are the Monarch, permanents you control have hexproof, which is really good in this deck because people want to interact with the big creatures that are coming at them, but if they have hexproof, they can't do anything about it. And furthermore, it has permanence, so we also protect our Monstrous Vortex, which is, great card. Galta Stampede Tyrant, 8 mana 12/12 with Trample, and when it enters the battlefield, put any number of creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield. We preferably like to cast all of our stuff simply to get more Gwenna triggers or Monstrous Vortex triggers, but there have also been board state where I was already so far ahead and I had my haste enablers on the battlefield where I was like, guys, really, I will just dump all of my creatures because I was having half my library in hand, and I was like, I pump all of my creatures, I swing them sideways, and I win the game. And Galta does a lot of work, and it's always often a way to shortcut games. Furthermore, we do play, how is it called again? We do play Greater Good. So with Galta's ETB on the stack, we can hold priority and sacrifice Galta into Greater Good, draw 12 cards, and after that we can let the Galta ETB resolve, and since we have drawn 12 cards, Jesus, we will be able to put out a bunch of creatures that we have just drawn. Regal Behemoth, a 6 mana 5/5 with Trample, and when it enters, we become the Monarch, and whenever you tap a land for mana, while you're the Monarch, add an additional mana. I probably don't have to explain how powerful additional mana is in especially mono green decks, so this hits really, really hard, and it's still a 5/5 with Trample. It's in German, guys, I'm sorry. Verärgerter Altisaurus, I think it's Curious Altisaur or something. A 7 mana 6/5 with Reach and Trample, but it has Cascade on it, which is why I play it. Cascade, free spell, you gotta go for it. Kodama of the East Tree, this card is so powerful, it's crazy, and does so much work in this deck. With most of these triggers, I always put land into play, simply to have more mana available to keep casting spells. But it's a 6 mana 6/6 with Reach, and whenever another permanent you control enters, if it wasn't put onto the battlefield with this ability, you may put a permanent card with equal or lesser mana value from your hand onto the battlefield, and it says permanent, so you can put lands into play, or simply your final overrun effect. We are mono green, we gotta do it, we play Concordant Crossroads, a 1 mana world enchantment, all creatures have haste. Remember that we do play Defiler of Vigor, so we can at some point also just pay 2 life, cast Concordant Crossroads, and all of our creatures have haste. This is one of our final haste enabler. Nissa, Ascendant Animist, a 7 mana, 7 loyalty planeswalker with completed, so for each Phyrexian symbol, we can cast it, of course, instead of paying with mana, we can pay it with life. And for each life paid this way, she comes in with 2 loyalty counters less. Her +1 ability makes a Phyrexian Worm token equal to, and power and toughness are equal to her loyalty. And her -1 says destroy target artifact or enchantment. And her -7 is my Craterhoof Behemoth in this deck. It says creatures you control get +X, where X is the number of forests you control, and gain trample. I don't play Craterhoof because I was like, I don't go wide, I go big. So I don't want win by numbers, I want to win with big creatures. This is also why we play Overwhelming Stampede, a 5 mana sorcery. Until end of turn, creatures you control gain trample and +X, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. This is also in German, sorry for that. So we do have a few final overrun effects, we do have a few haste enabler, and we do a lot of free slinging in this deck to chain a lot of stuff together and win with that. When it comes to lands, we do play Reliquary Tower because it happens quite often that I draw half my deck and I sit there and I don't want to discard, so we play Reliquary Tower. Mosswort Bridge, a hideaway land, which is also a free spell. This is why we play this card, and it comes in tapped and has hideaway 4, so look at the top 4, put 1 beneath it, and if you have the conditions met, you can cast the spell for free by paying 1 green and tapping the Mosswort Bridge. You may play the exiled card without paying its mana cost if creatures you control have total power 10 or greater, which is easy in this deck. Cast a Garen Brick, it enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a forest, and for 4 mana and tapping it, you can add 6 green mana, spend this only to cast creature spells or activate abilities of creatures. Great card. Yeah, there do exist cards like Glacial Chasm and stuff like that, which can prevent me from kicking all players out in 1 turn. So I do play Demolition Field for 2 mana, tapping it and sacrificing it, destroy target non-basic land and opponent controls, and we both search for basic lands. Wander's Enclave, it makes a colorless mana, and for 3 mana tapping it, we can draw a card, but we can only do that if we control a creature with power 4 or greater, which is easy for us in this deck. We don't do this quite often, simply because the deck became more and more consistent of not being able or not needing to rely on this ability, but it's still good to have if you're in a tougher spot at some point. Yeah, Devotion Theme. We play Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx. It's a legendary land. You can make 1 generic with this card, or you can pay 2, tap it, and choose a color. Add to your mana pool an amount of mana of that color equal to your devotion to that color. And yep, don't have to explain it. Mono green devotion is a known strategy and done in quite a few ways. So yeah, powerful card. After that, we play Forests. Also a reason that makes this deck quite cheap. Of course, there are a few expensive cards in this deck, but aside from all those expensive cards, our land base is actually really cheap, except for Nykthos, because we don't play that many fancy lands, just basics, good honest work, and this deck, yeah, it plays no tutors. That was also one of the conditions that I made for myself, because we do like to play really, really powerful decks, but at some point I was also like, I want to do some honest work, I want to play a deck, I want to build a deck that does only what the color can do, only, camera moved a little bit, no tutors. Okay, this deck does a lot of free spelling because of Cascade and Discover, but no free spells like a Fierce Guardianship or stuff like that. I wanted to build a deck that is not that powerful, but this one still turned out really, really powerful. But it feels really, really good because you only do one thing, and that is playing big creatures and swinging with them. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. This deck is definitely not finished yet. There do still, of course, exist cards like Skullspore Nexus or a Great Henge and other really synergistic creatures that would fit really, really good in this deck. But for now, this is a really solid version, and I do really like to play this deck. If you want to copy the deck list, I will put it into the notes below. And overall, this is my 3rd deck. I do play 3 decks. I do play my Whiter deck, I have my K&K deck, and I do have this Gwenna Eyes of Gaia deck, and all of them, yeah, make a lot of fun. As I've also mentioned earlier, people were asking me, why don't you play Selvala? And I was like, I want to play something that is not that widely played, and I've never seen somebody play Gwenna. And with her and the way how I built this deck, I would say that she is a better commander in this type of deck than Selvala, or at least she makes way more fun with me because she also sees this cast trigger. She grows really, really big, and I do have quite a few synergies with the greatest power among creatures I control. And I really like it. I do like all of these cast triggers, and it makes a lot of fun. And yeah, alright guys, this is the deck rundown for my Gwenna Eyes of Gaia deck. I hope you enjoyed it, and then I would say see you in the next video. Goodbye.